If you went to Tshwane right now and use the word coalition, people would be like, it's the worst thing, it's terrible, it serves nobody. But you ask the same person, okay, how do you feel about the GNU? No, I like this. This feels nice to me.
The difference between this and 1994 is that this was birthed more out of necessity, I suppose, than out of magnanimity.
Hang on a second. We can't just vote for an ideology. We need to vote for an agent that's going to serve our best interests.
Would shifting to a constituency-based model increase accountability for the individual? So if I vote for X and that person has the mandate for the particular constituency?
Do you know your ward councillor?
No.
Exactly.
A dynamic of your local councillors are not big personalities, which we enjoy, whether we like to admit it or not. We like the sizzle.
Now we will see Parliament being the body that represents the interests of South Africans, hopefully, and where we'll see more accountability.
What we haven't solved for is a strong opposition party, because someone needs to check the GNU. The automatic assumption that the GNU is going to be strong because the DA has an apparent record of good governance, etc., is a false one. And if
Come 2029, we are possibly, I'm not a prophet, we are possibly going to go into another coalition.
And she said, I resist with impunity. And that is when I knew I'd done my job as a mother.
Thank you very much. My fellow South Africans, welcome to this very important evening. So just a reminder to the guests to use the mics just like this so that we can be able to catch the audio when we're recording. Thank you very much. And feel free to ask questions at the end. If you feel like you want to send a WhatsApp message, you are free to do that. So guests, I recognize that I'm not going to pretend that everybody who's in the audience or who's going to watch even knows what GNU stands for. Some people might not know what it stands for or what it means or what the difference is between a GNU and coalition. So maybe we can start with Lauren, if you can just maybe break it down for us.
Wow. Okay, can everyone hear me? Just to qualify, first of all, my main area of expertise as a lawyer is constitutional and administrative law, so I'm going to leave a lot of the political things to those that are specialized in politics. But what I will say on the GNU, what does it mean? Have any of you actually read its statement of intent as a matter of interest? So I think it's the first thing I did when I found out about this government of national unity. So essentially, I suppose, it's like a kind of a marriage, right? And there are numerous parties that comprise this governing body. And for the first time ever, we no longer have a majority party dominant system. So where previously the state was government, it is no longer the case for the first time in our history by virtue of this government national unity. That is the nub of it for me, right? So because part of the reason we had such systemic state capture was because Parliament wasn't checking the executive, which is one of its core functions under the Constitution. But how can it if the majority of Parliament is actually being operated behind the scenes by a particular party? So the party became the government, became the state, and therefore the state, which is meant to have inbuilt checks and balances through a variety of institutions, stopped functioning as the Constitution envisages, as was built with Mandela in mind. So the government of national unity, the three main political parties, and I know tonight we're not speaking about political parties, but just for everybody's interest, I'm not aligning with any of them. I'm simply stating that the core trio is the ANC, the DA, and the IFP. And then, of course, you've got BOSA and Action SA and all of these other parties. But in short, what has been achieved is the loss of the so-called populist component, followers of the ANC that have now shifted to MK and EFF. Apparently, only 5% of the vote for the ANC in the last election was the populist vote. So as a result, and again, now I am sliding slightly into politics, but only because I did my research for today, Trudy, notwithstanding the PhD conclusion. In any event, the point is that it is a much more centrist ANC. So its policies, in quite large respect, align with that of the DA, the IFP, and so on. So the main thing to note is that if you read this Government of National Unity, if you Google it, and you read their statement of intent, it's very affirming. I was very excited on the night that I read it because, firstly, the first thing it underscores is the supremacy of our Constitution and the rule of law and the values, equality, dignity, freedom. But equally, it emphasizes the need for peace, the need for justice, the need for development, the need for sustainability, the need to work together. And I think, to my mind, President Cyril Ramaphosa has acted incredibly graciously, actually. And, if you read the statement, which I will obviously allow my panelists, I don't want to monopolize, but the point is that I can read extracts of it to you, because it's really very much about in the spirit of compromise, in the spirit of putting the people first. People often forget that the reason we have the state, let alone the government, is to serve the people. That's the whole purpose of the state, right? It's to advance the public interest. And what happened under state capture was that was completely quashed, is that we developed, unfortunately what happened was there was a self-serving state, not one that put the needs of its people first, because every time money is stolen, that's one less house built, that's one less person to educate, that's one less, functioning street lamp. So it was, to my mind, fundamentally, it was a blight on our dignity, and that is actually recognized in the statement of intent. They emphasize peace, they emphasize dignity, they emphasize development, they even emphasize the need to restore capacity at local level, because that's where service delivery matters the most. So what is the GNU? When I read the statement of intent, I thought, this is arguably a kind of non-anti-nuptial contract, right? It's sort of like preparing actually for the union rather than the dissolution of a union. And that's what it is. It's like, we reckon, there's going to be compromise and there's going to be give and take. And it's about bringing people together in terms of alignment on core aspects, core values, core goals. And yes, with 68%, this is very, very positive for our country, because if they do work together and they don't put their own self-interest or party interests first, but the interests of the country first, we can really see the change that we need. We can get back to the democracy that Nelson Mandela and others sought to build. So have I answered the question, what is the GNU? Isn't there a funny limerick about a GNU? I don't know. The GNU is a marriage with good intentions, and I think thus far we can take Cyril at his word, though so far I believe all the relevant parties are acting in good faith under the statement of intent.
So thank you very much. When we look at this marriage of convenience, I want to move to Ross, and just from good governance. We've had a GNU before, 1994. When you look at the difference between 1994 and 2024, what would you say are the differences between the two? And follow-up question to that, we've seen that local government coalitions haven't really worked. What would be different with the difference? Because the marriages have not worked at local level. How are they going to work at national level?
Oh my gosh, okay. So, now I'm going to try and be as positive as Lauren, but I don't know whether I'm going to succeed.
It's my default.
No, listen, it's good. I think, maybe at the outset to say I'm super pleased that we have a GNU as opposed to the alternative outcome. So economists always look at what the least worst outcome is, and we're pretty satisfied with that in a second best world. So this is far better than what the alternative could have been. The difference between this and 1994 is that this was birthed more out of necessity, I suppose, than out of magnanimity. But nonetheless, it did take some magnanimity, so that element of it shouldn't be taken away. But a government of national unity, I suppose technically in a political sense, would be where you include those who didn't do very well in the elections, just for the sake of genuinely achieving unity, and it did set us up very well. This was more a matter of necessity and having to for lack of a better phrase, kind of keep the wolf back from the door. Because those especially implicated in state capture have been largely kept out of this GNU, which is extremely helpful. So that's the difference. Now, marriages of convenience don't always work. And coalition building is new to us. I think that's the other thing to recognize. We are a new democracy and we're kind of muddling through. So when I studied politics, it was very unsatisfactory to me to hear that, okay, in policy terms, we're kind of muddling through. I wanted wholesale rational change. Everything must work just so, and the public service must be professionalized, and the political system should allow citizens to feel as if politicians are directly accountable. The proportional representation system that we have doesn't necessarily do that super well. At local level, there is more direct accountability. But I think that marriages of convenience not doing super well at the local level is a function of a range of factors. Local government is complicated. Lots of local governments have to deliver services on unfunded mandates. Many municipalities really struggle to raise any kind of revenue. It's much easier if you're a metro, you can raise revenue yourself. Not that all our metros are functioning particularly well, and if you read the Auditor General's report, which I had a glance at yesterday, metros are not doing very well either. Cape Town was the only one that got a clean audit. The reason for why those marriages of convenience are not working so well even now at the local level, you'll have seen Theewaterskloof this morning ousted the DA mayor, the Freedom Front Plus and the ANC essentially colluded to oust the DA mayor, which is not something I'd have predicted. When you study politics, they say, right, you have to have a theory that has explanatory and predictive power. I would never have put that collusion into my model. So I think, unfortunately, what happens is under conditions of uncertainty, parties band together for the sake of ousting those who stand in the way of what we call rent seeking or state capture. It's the extraction of rents from the system that are essentially unearned income, and that's perilous. So sometimes that's what's going on. There's an abuse. It's the emotion of no confidence, which is what's being abused at local level, is meant actually as a means of accountability, and it's being subverted and it's being perversely utilized to get rid of mayors who maybe hold their ground. There's quite a lot to work out. I hope I've answered your question in too many words.
Yes, you have. I'll go to you, Muzuri. When you look at, you know the importance of having values, and we were just talking now about how misaligned values could actually result in divorce. When we look at this marriage of convenience, there is like polar opposite views and values. They're completely different. Some are more left-leaning, some are more right-leaning. But when we look at all of that, like what does this mean for the person who is saying, hey, I channeled my inner fighter and I voted for my party, or another person who's saying, I voted for my party, but my party is not in the GNU. Does that mean my vote is lost?
So I think you've actually asked me two questions in that. So I'll answer the first one quickly. To carry on this marriage theme, I think where we are in the GNU, and even the use of the words GNU, I think are very political and very important, because GNU invokes that South Africa is coming out of apartheid and we're all going to work together. And we'll use Tshwane as an example. If you went to Tshwane right now and you use the word coalition, people would be like, it's the worst thing, it's terrible, it serves nobody. But you ask the same person, okay, how do you feel about the GNU? No, I like this. This feels nice to me. It invokes that post-94 kumbaya, we're all together. And so I think politically, the best thing that was done was the use of, I know there's people who have technical arguments against why it's actually not a GNU, but I think the use of the word's intentional. And then we sort of then trickle that into the marriage, right? So now we in the honeymoon stages, like life's nice, we just went on an amazing honeymoon, and the parts which are going to reveal the misalignment on values and policies are the tough things in a marriage. Do you want to have kids? Oh, well, we didn't. The theory of kids is nice, but now the practical, well, now it's time to make a baby. What's going on over here? Now it's time to decide on X, and now it's time to decide on Y. And I think we're edging closer to those very hectic, tangible things which are going to reveal maybe we're not 100% on the same page over here. And now we've got to figure out, do we stay in a marriage? Do we compromise on a kid? Do we have half a baby? Like, how does that work? But on the more positive side, or maybe it's more positive side with the values and the policy issues, a lot of where this is going to matter is actually in committees. This is really where the heart and the soul, or the engine rather, of the country runs, especially in Parliament, is in your committees. And I think a good example to highlight of this change of like leadership, but also the people who disagreed with this are still in the same committee, is the Home Affairs Portfolio Committee. So previously it was chaired by the ANC obviously had the majority. It was chaired by the ANC. You had Dr. Aaron Matsaledi, who was the Minister of Home Affairs, and what was being pushed at committee was very much ANC policy. Now you have the DA, and it's going to come out, in a very good example is the Electoral Amendment Bill. So the DA's policies are very much entrenched in wholesale electoral reform, constituency-based systems. That is their policy. It's always been their policy. They have an extensive document on it. And even in the last committee, chaired by the ANC, that was the policy that they were still pushing. Not but a few months later, now you've got you've got the DA now, and the ANC's policy is not that. But you still have members of the ANC in that committee. So we're going to see now, with the electoral laws now really being reviewed under this committee, what's now going to happen with a DA-chaired Home Affairs Committee, but with still very strong members of the ANC in there, and a lot of members of the GNU in that committee. How do you reconcile that? So we are getting closer to, are we having a baby stages of this marriage? And it's going to be very interesting, I think, to see it play out at committee level.
Can I just jump in there? I think you're quite right. The baby-making stage of the marriage is the tough bit. And in fact, there was a test in much earlier in deciding on cabinet. Most people would have expected that the DA, being sort of the minority partner in this GNU, sometimes called the Grand Coalition, that they would sort of have a more forceful decision or a decision on the number of cabinet ministers that they would have. But in the end, the ANC dominated cabinet, both in the number of ministers they have, number of the deputy ministers they had, disproportionate to their electoral outcome. Similarly, in Parliament, the ANC got the lion's share of chairpersonships in parliamentary committees. And that, I think, is important for committees that have a DA minister and an ANC chairperson of the committee. It's easier where you have a committee like sports, where both the chairperson and the minister are of sort of non-ANC political parties. But I think one of the biggest tests will be the budget, deciding on the budget, because budget season is coming up. For the most part, the GNU hasn't had to draw up a new budget. They've really carried over what they've seen in the last, from the previous administration. Now, with the midterm budget in October, that's where some of their priorities will come in. And I was actually looking at the education minister and the education ministry, and she has a set of priorities that Angie Muteka didn't really signal towards earlier this year or even in previous years. So it will be quite interesting to see how many of those priorities come in the budget, because that is quite a contested space. And of course, the DA for the longest time has been calling for a more manageable budget, slashing departments, slashing certain functions in order to manage the budget. But now that some of them are in government, I was listening to the DA Minister of Home Affairs saying that we actually need more staff, and that goes diametrically opposed to what they've been arguing, that government is too big. So now suddenly government is needed to be big for their own departments.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to weigh in on these last two points? Because I'm
yeah.
just interested. I mean, I came up with the metaphor of the marriage. Then it was qualified to be a marriage of convenience. Okay, fine. And then we've got this metaphor of our poor baby being conceived, right? Now, I think just for the sake of our audience, we need to give like tangible examples there. So you've alluded to, I think Mbex has really, and both of you have actually alluded to the main one, which is about, I think, in terms of, because the question was phrased like, they're polar opposites. Polar is a strong word, right? Polar suggests like we're diametrically opposed. They're not, okay? What's left of the ANC now that has formed part of the GNU is a more centrist ANC, right? It's less. It believes fundamentally in the liberal democratic values of the Constitution, and it believes in the rule of law and so forth. And most of the extreme leftists have left, right? To excuse the pun. They've left the party. Here is the statement of intent. But I think so I actually think their policies are more closely aligned than we think. The one area where I think there is going to be issues is in relation to the economy, is economic development, because that is the one thing that, the DA has openly been very, very strong on. And the ANC is slightly more socialist in its focus in that respect. So in terms of thinking about, well, what baby is going to be thrown out with what bathwater, or what is not going to be conceived, to answer the question, I don't know if you guys agree with me, but that would be, for me, I think it's the need for, having said this, I think that if you read the statement of intent, the biggest thing is this need for stability and compromise, and it comes through very, very strongly, and the need not to lose foreign investor confidence, and the need to ensure economic stability. And I mean, as you rightly pointed out, it's clever language, it's unity, right? That's what, we don't want sudden changes, we don't want anything extreme. So I think where things are going to get tricky is where it comes to matters like those controversial matters, like expropriation without pay, or the National Health Insurance Act. I think for the survival of the GNU until the next electoral term, and for the stability of the economy and society, they're going to need to try and park those really, I suppose, controversial matters, is my sense. As for the local government question, what I actually think is so interesting is that I think it's by virtue of the fact that people started seeing metropoles falling, that the ANC slowly lost power, right? Because this is where the rubber hits the road. So if you come to Cape Town and you see the lights are on and the potholes are generally filled, and, things generally work, like the rubbish is generally collected, and you go to the city and it's relatively clean. And then you go into the heart of Johannesburg or whatever, and you feel like you're in a different land, you're in a different universe. It was through local governance, right, that people started to see, hang on a second, we can't just vote for an ideology. We need to vote for an agent that's going to serve our best interests, because the government is the agent of the people. It's a fiduciary relationship. And at the end of the day, as soon as the metropoles and the local government started falling, suddenly the ANC lost majority dominance. And this is not to say the ANC is bad or good, or any political party is bad and good. The key point is that having one party have a majority of seats in parliament is harmful for democracy in and of itself. That is the bottom line. And within our constitution, it states you lose your seat in parliament if you are no longer a member of the party that put you there. So what does that mean? It means that MPs don't vote with their conscience. It means that they toe the party line. And so for the first time, we have, in a sense, checks and balances in place, right? We actually have a situation where, yes, it might get awkward. We've now got the Committee on Home Affairs being chaired by DA, and we're seeing declining waiting lists. Wonderful. Maybe that's why they need more people, because actually they're getting the waiting lists down, you know? But the point of the story is that this is good. It's this the friction is needed. It's because when there's no friction, when there's no tension, when there's no checking and balancing, when it's just a smooth ride, that is when, and I have read all 5,000 pages of the Zondo report in print, every single one, and I cried when I read some of them. And I can tell you now, it was happening before our eyes, and we missed it. And if the checks and balances are kept alive, that's when you don't miss it.
Tyrone,
Sorry,
please.
I get quite passionate on that topic.
Yes. Can I make a small counter argument, which we haven't seen maybe play out yet, just because of the stage that we're in this GNU, is I might argue that there's less friction now. Because for whatever your principles are on the DA, what they were very good at was accountability. They were very, very good at investigating the nitty-gritty. They were very good at checking everything happening in committees. They were very good at the public, contacting the public protector, pieing things. They were excellent at that. A very, very strong opposition party. And opposition parties are very important in a healthy democracy. What the GNU has done is now absorbed your strongest opposition party with a lot of experience and institutionalism to do that, and left you with a new political party to assume that quote-unquote official position. And I'm not sure we are sure yet about the efficacy of opposition in parliament yet. So while there will be awkward conversations, I think our concern should be that those awkward conversations are going to be sorted in sort of the back rooms for the sake of GNU, when they actually shouldn't be done that way. Those awkward conversations need to be fought out in committee, in the open, with checks and balances of a strong opposition. So for all of the good that the GNU delivered in terms of unity and we're working together and we didn't collapse after an election, what we haven't solved for is a strong opposition party, because someone needs to check the GNU. The automatic assumption that the GNU is going to be strong because the DA has an apparent record of good governance, etc., is a false one. And if we don't keep our eyes open, it's going to become a problem there as well.
So I'm going to kick back a bit. I'm going to come to you, and because you mentioned, yes, you mentioned that that it's not polar opposite. They're not polar opposite, right? But when we let's look at foreign policy, which is largely informed by who's funding who and etc. I mean, DIRCO under Dr. Naledi Pandor was, okay, I'm not going to mention it, but so when we look at all of those things, like you soon realize that these people actually believe something that's different. And the second thing I just wanted to point out is you mentioned that, yes, it works, Cape Town works, but then a person in Khayelitsha will ask, it works for who? So what does it mean for that person who's asking, does this work? Is this working for me?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll stick to the law, if I may, on this, because that's my field of expertise, right? I mean, you're right. Look, at the end of the day, in terms of policy alignment and the word polarity, we had a situation, and now we have a new situation. And I read the document that supposedly embodies the policy as these parties see it. So they agree on these core principles. And insofar as they agree on these core principles, I think the matter of misalignment may play out in practice, as my colleagues have said here, but I think to my mind, when I read it, it seems to strike some sort of a balance, okay, which gave me a degree of optimism. This is not to say that we must ever again, as has rightly been said, assume accountability will happen. We, and also we the people. I mean, I think people forget, how powerful that they can be in exercising their right to participatory democracy, whether it be through giving... I wrote an op-ed the other day on the 21st Constitution Amendment Bill that was put forward by DA MP at the time as a private member, Glenys Breitenbach, on the so-called Standing Anti-Corruption Commission. And I certainly believe we need one. But in the spirit of constructive engagement, I don't think one in the form in which she suggested will pass constitutional muster because it unlawfully takes away power from the NPA. So I wrote something on it with a colleague, and she now wants to engage with me on it. Now the point is that this is, people forget, what I tell my students all the time is, when there's a call for public comment, give your comment. I mean, when I see a hole in the road, I take a photo and I send it to the City of Cape Town's Facebook, because I recently drove over a pothole and my literally freewheeled to my son, I have 4 children, freewheeled to my son's school, like on my rim. This pothole was gigantic. And then in typical Ubuntu style, I had like my Uber driver and some other person helping me change my tire. But the point is that the next day, that pothole was filled, okay? I sent the picture on Facebook and I sent it, and that's accountability. But we forget that we can do that. You see? And regarding local government, because this is something I did apply my mind to, we actually don't, so there are provisions in the Constitution, and this has happened, like textbook gate, right? Where national government, we have a sort of a quasi-federalist system, right? So we have national government, and then we have provincial, and then we have local. And in a sense, local is more powerful than provincial because they can raise property taxes, right? Property rates. That's why local government was a state of capture, a place of capture. And that's why so many municipalities are dysfunctional, right? Because those coffers were emptied. And in fact, in the GNU Statement of Intent, they explicitly undertake to help fix and build capacity at local government level. But there are provisions within the Constitution that enable national government to intervene. And one of these concerns economic stability, which is quite interesting. National security, interestingly also, it's often thrown around, but having reread the Constitution today from cover to cover, it actually is determined on consultation with Parliament and the executive, right? So it's not like you can just say, we can't get a rotisserie chicken, this is a matter of national security. People need to reread the Constitution, okay? They really do, from cover to cover. And the other thing is that, it's very interesting, the only person in respect of whom the responsibility lies explicitly to maintain the unity of the Republic is the President. It states that. He has the obligation to ensure the unity and the well-being of the people. That is actually mentioned in the section on cooperative governance. And the point is that that did not happen under Jacob Zuma's reign. Now this is, I'm not, so we can hold the President accountable. That is a duty and that is an obligation on him to ensure local government, insofar as they're not. And I see what you're saying, because it's about the haves and the have-nots, about where things are fixed and how, and you're absolutely right. Like, it needs to be fair play across the board in the best interest of everyone. But when I think of those rolling blackouts, which is the state capture staring you in the face. I mean, if you didn't believe in state capture, and you were trying to do your kids' homework by candlelight, or people sitting in the darkness trying to heat their baby's bottled formula, or whatever it might be, that is the result of a captured state. Now, at the end of the day, what does that mean? You cannot live a dignified life, irrespective of your status or your class or whatever. Yes, there's certain ways in which people, I agree with you, can certainly improve it. But I mean, most citizens can't afford solar and whatever. Yeah. This is the point. So, if that is when people need to vote government out of office. And that is what has happened. And now we have to hold them to the marriage contract. They have to stick to this. I don't know. I'd be interested to actually consider what the legal status of this. Bex, I don't know if you... Okay. What do you...
I actually wanted to push back a little bit on your faith in the statement of intent.
No. Okay, tell me why.
It is wonderful as a values document, as a political statement. Yes. But the question is enforceability. Yeah. And unfortunately, as lawyers, we have this idea that once you sign, then automatically enforcement follow. Yeah. But in a political document like this, unfortunately, it doesn't happen like that. Which is why, when it came to forming cabinet, Helen Zille was waiving this document to say, clause 19 says that you must consult me on inviting more partners. And the ANC said, what? What clause 19? And so they were able to get more partners in, even without the DA's consent. In Gauteng, they were able to form a government excluding the DA, despite the statement of intent. Yeah. So I think as a values document, it is important, and it includes good language, which I think helps us hold the government accountable. But in terms of enforcing it, especially on the difficult questions, look, I'd be interested in when you look at this document and the values included in that document, when it comes to determining foreign policy. Will the DA and the ANC agree on a statement on the war in Gaza or even the war in Sudan? Or will there be polar opposites, the polar opposites that you spoke about earlier, Tyrone? So I think that it remains to be seen, but it is something that we must keep our mind open to, that there will be disagreement, and we as citizens might need to step into where there's that deep disagreement to say, actually, you guys should focus on the real, on the public interest.
Yeah, there's a lot of positives when it comes to where we're at right now. I'm going to come to you as we are about to make this baby that we're talking about. The amazing work that you guys are doing at Judges Matter. When you look at, pre-elections, we were talking about impeachment and this issue and that issue. How does that play out now because of this government of national unity, where we're at? How does that play out from a legal point of view and from a vested, like someone who's invested in it? Like, how does that play out?
I think one of the things that the state capture period taught us is that we do need institutions of accountability for our system of democracy to function properly. Parliament needs to step up and play its role, and one of the positives of having multi-party, or one of the positives of having power split among different parties is that now we will see Parliament being the body that represents the interests of South Africans, hopefully, and where we'll see more accountability. We will see less pressure, I hope, on the courts, because what had happened over the last couple of years is that the courts were now playing a bigger and bigger role in our accountability system, in resolving political disputes. There was less and less time to debate issues in Parliament, try to negotiate, try to persuade each other on the floors of Parliament. You could just, as soon as you lost a debate, you ran to court, and with the hope that the court will intervene and address those issues. That obviously is good in some ways, because the Constitution does give courts sort of an oversight power over certain constitutional questions, but it's not good when you use it too much. It's like the courts are a pressure valve. When things get too pressurized, then the courts should intervene very sparingly to deal with specific questions. But now, each and every question was ending up in the courts. So one positive thing, hopefully, from this new GNU moment is that we will see other areas of society stepping up and being sites of deliberation and discussion, but also being sites of accountability. Hopefully, and I think for me, the first test is on Friday, when the Minister of Justice has to account to Parliament over corruption allegations. How that session goes will determine whether this GNU moment is the real deal, or it's a smokescreen.
Rose, what does this mean for the average South African? What does
Look, it's too early to say. There are some signs of economic easing, but that probably doesn't yet have a lot to do with the GNU per se. However, sentiment happens to be very important in an economy, and what happens in the economy really matters for all of us. You'll have seen that petrol prices went down yesterday. Interest rates are likely to go down. I'm an economist by training. I've been longing for the interest rates. Ross. I've been longing for the interest rates to go down. I was heavily opposed to lockdown, so don't shoot me. But largely because of its negative economic impacts, which then have latent health impacts, and we're still actually suffering that. But the fact that inflation is easing and the fact that interest rates are likely to come down, those are also attributable to global things that are beyond our control. but stability communicated in the statement of intent, and the fact that they did manage to put a cabinet together despite early wobbles, that does bode well economically. Our unemployment rate is still dreadfully high at 33.5%, and that's just a narrow definition. That doesn't include people who've given up looking for work. So it's too early to say. But one thing that is clear, and it's been raised, is that the quality of opposition in Parliament is now significantly worse than it was. And that does matter for your maybe your less engaged citizens. So we do need a more engaged citizenry. It has been mentioned.
It starts in the home, it starts in the lecture hall, it starts
Totally.
everywhere. You know, people need to know what most people don't even know what the Constitution empowers them to do.
You need, and you do need to, I mean, part of what we're trying to do at Good Governance Africa is encourage citizens to engage between elections. You know, so part of our campaign, if you like, is to say, look, it doesn't begin and end at the ballot box. You know, it begins at the ballot box, but it actually, you've really got to engage. So that's going to matter. I think the other element or the corollary to the question is that at local level, the magnanimity or the elements of the statement of intent at national level haven't necessarily translated at the local level. I might also say, just in response to Lauren's comments about, you know, the fact that the ANC lost its majority was probably not only because of a lack of governance, which is manifest at local level. That's where most citizens feel it. But I think, unfortunately, it was also very much an ethno-nationalist vote. So it's not a nice thing to have to examine. But if you look at the correlation between Zulu-speaking areas and votes for MK, it's quite disturbing. And then, I mean, I don't mean to take this conversation off track, but I think one of the things you do need to think about in a GNU is what happens after the ANC's National Elective Conference at the end of 2025. What's MK's long-term game? What are they doing, destroying the EFF?
They may self-sabotage.
Yeah, so well, that's an option, but certainly the quality of opposition is weakened, and I think that the centrist remains, if you like, the remnant of the ANC that entered into this GNU is going to have to really be extremely pragmatic and wise, and the minority, well, the largest minority party in the GNU is going to have to build credibility. Unfortunately, the Minister of Agriculture has not taken great steps in that respect thus far, and that jeopardizes a pretty fragile marriage.
This marriage must be...
But sorry, for the ordinary citizen, I think it's good for now. I think we need to give some serious thought to what's going to happen a little bit further down the road.
Yeah, let me ask you a follow-up question, and you also can come in here. What would be the advantage of a constituency-based model, which I believe it's a better way of doing things because it's mandate direct to the member of parliament. Do you see any value in changing? Because I think that come 2029. We are possibly, I mean, I'm not a prophet, we are possibly going to go into another coalition, if that is possible. Would shifting to a constituency-based model increase accountability for the individual? So if I vote for X and that person has the mandate for the particular constituency, would that be an advantage?
I have a question for you.
Do you know
accountability? Do you know your ward councillor?
No.
Exactly. So
I know
ward
my ward
councillors, ward councillors, ward councillors are constituency based, right? They serve your specific ward in your specific area, and they're supposed to take care of your potholes and your street lights, and make sure that the rubbish is collected, and you need to get, and you WhatsApp them if the power goes out. And for most of us, we have no idea who our ward councillors are. So depending on whether you know your ward councillor or not, and you replicate that idea from on a national level. And remember, ward is much would be smaller than a constituency, which is big. So in as much as I like the idea of direct accountability, but I have a sense that it might not be as promising as we make it out to be. And part of the dysfunction at local government actually is not necessarily that the councils are not dysfunctional because we don't have direct accountability for ward councillors. It's because when people get to council, somehow the political parties have greater say, or the vote or the politics or the rent-seeking that Ross spoke about sometimes dominate. So it's I think for me, it's more complicated.
But at
People
the
of
end of the day,
integrity.
how many people actually vote for the individual?
Yes.
At what level?
Yeah.
I mean, if we just look at, I mean, this is why, so just for anyone who's interested, like my doctoral thesis looks at the fourth branch of state, which a lot of people think is just our Chapter 9 institutions, like good old the public protector, previously under Thuli Madonsela's reign. There are actually other bodies in the Constitution that I believe form part of this branch, the checking that Mbek spoke about. But the point of the matter is, who leads, the person actually does matter. And it should matter, because under Thuli Madonsela's incumbency as public protector, it was because of her fearlessness and her integrity and her ruthless determination to keep digging that we got the Secure and Comfort report. And we realized that public money was spent on certain things. And then she said, actually, I don't have the capacity or the funds. I've just touched the tip of an iceberg here. I now need someone, we need a special commission to dig even deeper. So the Zondo commit, and then we had a court say, so it was in fact a cycle of accountability. A lot of people don't understand that in fact, it's multiple institutions within the system doing their respective bit. And as Mbek's rightly pointed out, the courts were having to do too much of that work under the prior dispensation, which goes back to your point, which is that, yes, we do need a viable opposition, but every time we run to the courts, the DA or the EFF run to court, that puts the court under strain, and it can compromise its judicial integrity, its moral authority. It brings it into the realm, as Mbek said, of the political, which is awkward, and it's uncomfortable, and it's not really what it should be doing. But it had to. It filled the democratic breach. So I think the point is that people don't realize it was the media, it was civil society that started phoning the public protector's office saying, hang on, there's a chicken run, there's a fire pool, there's a this, there's a this. And then she says, you know what? We need a commission of inquiry. They need to dig deeper. And the president says, no, that's a head of state power under Section 84 of the Constitution. You can't tell me to appoint a commission of inquiry. And guess what? Goes to court again. And so we don't only have the Concord saying that in appropriate circumstances, the public protector can issue binding remedial findings, appropriate, but we have a court saying that it is appropriate in this case that the public protector ordered the establishment of a commission of inquiry. And in addition, the president has issued a response thereto. Now, I don't know if any of you have actually taken the time to read it, but it's interesting. It talks about the action. So what is the issue? What are the actions that have been taken? How far are we going? And I mean, I take them to task insofar as they're not, doing enough. But the point is that it's a feedback loop of accountability. And that's what is needed. I mean, my dear friend, the late Stu Willman, he just passed away recently. He was quite sad, professor. And he called it a star-like chamber of accountability. That's what is needed with these cyclical feedback loops where you have one person who really cares and notices something. And she phones Thuli's office. And one good person there says, I'm going to keep digging. And then you have a fearless person at the top. And this is, for me, what's essential. This is why this fourth branch thing, it's not just about accountability bodies. It's about who leads them. The Constitution was built with Mandela in mind. It was not built with a leader who would strategically, deliberately, and flagrantly steal the public's money for his own self-serving gain. And that is just a fact. This is not me aligning with anyone. That's just a statement of fact. So at the end of the day, we need people in charge that are people of conscience And you can see that there's a shift to that now. I mean, finally now, if you read, there's this new Office for Accountability and Integrity and Ethics within the National Prosecuting Authority. There is now there's legislation that has been passed for an investigating directorate that is now permanent in relation to corruption. You know, there's now a Procurement Act that's been signed into law because procurement was a huge start of state capture. And there's provision here, again, for an Office of Integrity and Accountability. So it's actually about the people, the culture of leadership, the quality of leadership, the fearlessness of the leadership of integrity that trickles down, whether it's at municipal level or wherever it might be. And that is what emboldens and encourages people to follow suit. It inspires people to follow suit. So, sorry, I've tangented a little bit there, but I think
May
it's
I
really
answer
important. Like, I feel very
the
strongly about this.
Yeah.
May I answer the
You-
constituency-based system question? Yeah? Is that can I?
You go for it.
Sure.
I'll chip in.
So I think it's important with electoral reform that we never purport a system as a silver bullet. There is no electoral system that is going to 100% solve for accountability, and it's important that we keep that in the back of our minds. I will, however, say that there is a case to be made about some form of maybe overhaul or moving towards a constituency-based system for this reason. So when we decided on the electoral system that we had as a country, there were a set of values that we were looking at, and we were looking at a system which was only supposed to be temporary. So this system was actually only supposed to last us one election cycle, and it was very clear, even in the interim constitution, that this is the system we're using, and then you guys need to figure this out, and we just never did. So it is outdated by its nature. It was never supposed to last this long. The second point of it is the values we were solving at in 1994 are very different for the values that we need to solve for now, which is very normal in a democracy. And I think sometimes we get uncomfortable, like, why are we changing things? We are very young. And it is normal in a democracy for needs to change, and therefore your electoral system needs to respond to the need of the day. And at the time in 1994, the need of the day was we need to re-enfranchise the majority of people that we disenfranchised. And we need to make sure that the system is simple. So whatever we choose, it needs to be simple. Whatever we choose, it needs to bring in everybody. Those things are largely solved for. Now, our issue of the day, which has been raised here multiple times, is accountability. So the electoral system needs to respond to the need, and the need is accountability. And part of why constituency-based systems may help, or part of why constituency-based systems are being advocated for, because it is but one part that can potentially solve for the question that we now have of accountability. And the broad PR system or political party/independent PR system that we have is not designed to do that. It is designed to bring everyone in and to make sure that, again, in 1994, what we were trying to solve for was that you wanted to make sure that you had a system where minorities felt that at least even if it's just one, my voice is going to be represented, my person is going to be represented. Not the real issue that we have today. The issue that we're trying to solve for is accountability. This is but one component that can potentially solve for. Then I think another case for constituency-based system and this tension about the individual. As much as we exist in a PR system which largely is sort of designed for political parties, we are very much attached to the individual. And I say this because we think of party, we think of leader. How many of you in the political party that you voted for know who was number 5, number 6, number 7 on the list? You do not. And those people matter because those people sit in committees. Those people are doing daily work to advance your causes. And so I think part of what can solve for that is just bringing a different level of closeness to people who are making decisions on their behalf every day. And maybe the one point about what was raised about, do you know your local councillor? I think part of that is a dynamic of your local councillors are not big personalities, which we enjoy, whether we like to admit it or not. We like the sizzle. But part of it is also not understanding the power of local government. And so you'll see someone will call John Steenhuisen about a pothole. But that's a disconnect. So once we actually do better at public education and making people understand the power of local government, then they will have a bigger incentive to actually get to know their ward councillor than an incentive to know the party of a political party, the leader of a political party who is quite frankly going to do squat all for you in terms of your daily life. Yeah.
So, I fully agree with that. I taught politics many years ago, and one of the things I used to like saying was that accountability has a look and feel about it. If you mess up in the UK, a van arrives outside 10 Downing Street and it takes your stuff away. And when Nkandla was happening, that didn't happen. And that, it's not a great analogy, but it does show you some of the difference. There are pitfalls to an entirely constituency-based system in that voters tend to vote for their least worst candidate rather than for the candidate who they really believe in. And so, where the individual matters, you do get more individual accountability. But let's say you're trying to choose between 3 candidates. I've got you 3 here, and I say, all right, listen, she's ace, right? She's my candidate, but her party is not actually likely to win out. Plus, I know my neighbors, and they're not aligned, so they're going to vote for option B. And if they vote for option B, that means that, hey, we might land up in a particularly bad situation. So I'm just going to go with the safe candidate to avoid my worst outcome.
Yeah.
And that's why you see, for instance, like the Lib Dems, they'll gain a lot nationally, but in terms of actual seats, like on a constituency basis, they don't come out very well. So for that reason, it looks as if South Africa is probably eligible for a mixed constituency system, maybe something closer to the German model. There's a bit of trial and error involved here. We did have the Van Zyl-Slabbert Commission in 97, 98, and I think a lot of those recommendations unfortunately didn't go anywhere, but it was pretty well thought through. We've done some work to try and synthesize all the work that has been done on electoral reform since then, and I do think it is critical. What you don't want is a party system that results in one-party dominance, and that is still a risk under the current system, because let's say MK cannibalizes the EFF, becomes relatively powerful. Let's say it co-opts elements of the centrist remains of the ANC. Cyril's going to be out of the ANC at the end of, is going to be out of the presidency of the ANC at the end of 2025. We don't know who his successor is going to be. We don't know what the ANC is going to look like, and we don't know how susceptible it's going to be to reforming with MK. And under a PR system, that would not bode well for us. So,
does
forgive
everyone
the
in the
risk
audience know
manager
what a PR
inside
system
me.
is? Shall we check? I
Yeah,
mean,
proportional
'cause
representation.
I mean, I don't know if we need to assume.
Well, okay.
mean,
let's,
so it's closed list
shall we do a
proportional
30
representation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Lauren, you can add when I.
I just think it's important because a lot
yeah.
of people don't. I mean, you raised a very valid point about the fact
Totally.
that this was meant to be an interim measure, and here we're still sitting with it.
Yeah.
So closed list proportional representation, which is our electoral system, we can see the lists, right? But we can't influence them.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the key takeaway point, is that we know who forms, if we wanted to, we can go up. And I mean, I printed all the manifestos of the parties, and you can check the list, and you can do your due diligence, but you can't influence the rank and file of who's on that list. Okay, so ultimately, what is typically done as a matter of strategy is that those that toe the party line are going to be higher up on the list. Yeah. And the names that are higher up on the list relative to the proportional votes that get seats in parliament then get placed in parliament. And as I said earlier, if you lose your seat in the party, you lose your seat in parliament. So the entire system, if we're talking the language of economics and rent-seeking and incentivization, is not good, which is why one of Zondo's recommendations was that we reform the electoral system. And I think there is something to commend that. I mean, I think you're right. Like, we haven't seen it play out perfectly at local government level. And you're right, we need a sizzling personality on TV. And the one good thing about the lockdown was we suddenly saw our president, you know? I mean, for me, that was like a key takeaway. It's like,
nobody in
my
the family
fellow
could
South
speak.
Africans, you know? And finally, my kids are like, we have a president, you know? And I'm like, you see, there he is. So for me, like, you're absolutely right. Like, we need grassroots solutions. We need to educate people, like, in simple terms. What does this mean? If this, then this. What is your right? I mean, as it happens, like, I had my third child during the hard lockdown. Couldn't buy baby clothes because they weren't an essential good. So people were breaking the rules to throw them over because, let's face it, half the rules were irrational, but that's besides the point. But my child heard me lecturing a lecture online. There's a famous judgment called Odacrol, where if someone seeks to enforce a law against you that infringes your liberty, your life, or your property, you may resist with impunity. You say to them, you challenge me in court. And then you use the law as a shield and you challenge the law collaterally and you say, you know what? You've actually tried to enforce a law against me that is invalid. It's unconstitutional. And so when my then 3-year-old went back to school and was told to put on a mask, she knew the reg said 5, and she'd heard me lecture. And she said, I resist with impunity. And that is when I knew I'd done my job as a mother.
I don't mean to...
Because I'd informed them.
Yeah.
See, this is the point. We must inform people.
Yes.
We need to bring
Yeah.
the Constitution to life for people. We need... And I actually want to do this. Like, I want to build something that actually, like, makes it accessible for people and inspires people, because we've got the power. People just don't realize it.
I don't mean to venture into governance, which is not my speciality, but I just wanted to make a connection between the governance side and this PR system and just make it a little bit more tangible. So what we've seen now today, actually, you would have seen in the news, there's a whole bunch of MK parliamentarians who have gone to court to say, but I was unduly removed from my position in the party, which then obviously now I can't be a member of parliament anymore. Now, is it a spicy, juicy topic? Yes. Will we be following for the juice and the tea? Absolutely. But where the governance aspect of this becomes important, and where the failings of a PR system, a closed list PR system comes in, is that there are committees that are running still. And where are those MK slots? So someone should be doing work in committee every day. Someone should be doing work in parliament every day. And instead of them doing that work, they have been rotated with 20 days, 30 days, 40 days. So there's no transfer of institutional knowledge. There's no continuity. You rocking up to a thing now, I'm now in this Department of Trade and Industry, and I just got here yesterday. And the reason why this is particularly problematic is, again, this is how you can manipulate a system. So the IEC designed the system from an IEC perspective. The IEC closed the lists for, I think it's 100 days, if I'm not wrong, where you are not allowed to like move your lists for 100 days. That might seem arbitrary, but it's built with stability in mind. That for 100 days, can we all sit down and do work and find our feet before you guys are moving your list up and down, left and right. But I can just cheat the system by removing you off my list. Now, again, let's say I deeply desired for person number 5 on the MK list to be in parliament because I found their CV somewhere, I connected with them, they recruited me, and the reason I voted for MK was because number 5 was supposed to be doing work. And in less than 20 days, with no reason, quote unquote, we'll see, that person is removed without my participation, without my input, and all I can do is be a bystander in a system. The more the system makes you a bystander, the more problematic it is. So all I can do now is watch them go to court. They'll probably lose. No, I take that back. All we can do is watch them go to court, and the result of that is now out of my hands as someone who voted for a particular party, maybe with this person in mind, and all I can do is watch the theatrics play out. But more disturbingly, the work of the day is not being done because you guys are shuffling helter-skelter.
Yeah, I agree with what you guys are saying. I just need to, as Christians, we obviously hoping for stability. So I just want to ask you guys quickly from Ross, and we go all the way down. 2 things, literally 10 seconds. What are the 2 things we should be praying for when it comes to the government of national unity and what it means for the average person? So if I'm an average person, what should I be praying for? What should I be praying for? Let's put it those 2.
Good. So 5 seconds on doctrine, 5 seconds on what to pray for.
Okay.
Government is there to advance good and to punish evil. That's ultimately what government is about. That's what Romans 13 says. So for us, that means praying for the good to be advanced and for our leaders to have wisdom to know how to do that, even under the current constraints. And then it means praying for a citizenry that is engaged. I think that that's crucial. You know, we don't often add that second dimension. So pray for wisdom and then pray that all of us would be more engaged. We do need an active citizenry.
Tough question. Ooh. Maybe I should couch it this way. All of us should fundamentally have hope for our country, but that is actually rooted in us having a sense of, I don't want to use the word love because I can get weird, but all of us having a sense of, I'll use Ubuntu for each other. And I think that's where politics and politicians can try to divide that. And if we can fundamentally every day hold on to the values of Ubuntu between each other, there is no populist rhetoric that is going to be able to penetrate through that in society. And I think that's what that's the ideal we should hold on to.
Mutsuli, you've taken my point. What I was wishing for is, and one of the things that I think for now, after this GNU moment, is this idea of division. And a lot of political parties are harping on this division, whether it's on tribal lines, on racial lines. And Ross, you mentioned earlier about how there's an ethno-nationalist component of the vote. The MK party is now the official opposition in parliament, and their brand is really on division, really on sowing division amongst us. And so one of the things that I wish for is that we would have more understanding, more tolerance, more unity. We don't always have to agree on everything, but if we can sort of celebrate together when there's a victory of the Springboks, or when we can have open discussions on difficult issues, on race, on the economy, on other issues. If we can have a difficult discussion but still hold each other with that unity, with that Ubuntu, that spirit is essential for making our government function, because our government needs to, and our politics need to respond to a unity that we as people have. And this conversation is great for that. Thanks, Trudy.
Yeah, I mean, sure, I'm last here and I concur fully with my learned sisters and brothers. For me, the three main takeaways, like Ubuntu, a person is a person through other people, and actually power to the people. Like, I actually pray that everyone starts to know their own power in holding government account and actually applies their mind, actually doesn't just vote for the person, but, or the as you said, on sort of ethnic grounds or whatever it might be, but actually looks at, is the work being done? Are the people showing up? And actually recognize their capacity to slowly build momentum to be the change that we need. Like, I want everyone to feel empowered to be the change that we need. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is I really, we almost started this conversation. So for me, it's now like this. It's come to me. I always like to think, when I think of the law, principle, pragmatism, and now I'm going to add prayer, because I'm in this space. So I can do it, right? So principle, pragmatism, and prayer. I mentioned this metaphor of a marriage, right? Let's hope that this marriage succeeds. Let's not bet on it failing. Let's not bet on, let's not put the problems before they arise. Let's cross each bridge as we get to it. Let's act in good faith, give the benefit of the doubt, and allow, as you said, those conflicts to arise and work through that, recognizing that often it is through tension that we get change, that we get growth. This is the very output of that. The main takeaway in terms of prayer goes to what Ross has said earlier. And in fact, I think all of our panelists. But for me, it's about, we need to pray for light. Light needs to eclipse the darkness. Light of integrity, of accountability, of fearlessness, of courage, of bravery. And that is hard. But we need to pray for brave, integral, fearless people that back themselves to stand up to power and hold it to account. Because all it takes is a few good men to speak loudly against injustice and to speak against the abuse of power, and then we can be the change that we need in this world. So I pray that you all pray for light to eclipse impunity. Thank you.
Welcome to Lauren's TED Talk. I'll just add that don't forget to pray for Cupcake. it is important to pray for our president. Over to you, Trudy.
There are two questions, Tyrone. This is really an evening of bonus features. We have a bonus speaker in Dr. Ross Harvey. We have two bonus questions, and then we land this evening. And the wonderful thing is that I also didn't realize that we are live streaming. You are on live stream, and one of the questions has come in via the live stream. So can I hand them to you?
Okay.
Tyrone, thank you.
I see sometimes. Okay. First question. If a government of national unity performs well and gains the support of the citizens, what mechanisms or strategies can be put in place to ensure that this unity is maintained or continued in other elections? You want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, that actually would be the best possible outcome for all of us, because it will sort of be positive reinforcement then that this government of national unity model actually works. It might actually push those who would want division and who would want to sow confusion, to push them on the fringes. And it would actually push more people to some sort of center, some sort of pragmatism, or some sort of let's agree on a program that works, because we've seen already it works and the voters will reward what works. So I think that is the best possible outcome, but of course, it's something that we cannot be naive, that there'll be people working towards undermining that and causing the division.
Maybe from a, again, governance perspective, is about one thing that we haven't done as a country at a national level, which a lot of sort of comparative jurisdictions who typically operate in this kind of GNU atmosphere is actually regulating it. So currently we're operating on the vibes of the marriage contract, but there is actually that little 4 or 5 pager. But what we have not done yet, and maybe what the question is also probably alluding to, is that how do we form structures that can better support a GNU in the future? And I think that's work that we will probably need to do and sort of borrow from other jurisdictions where they actually have frameworks in place about, in this situation, this is what we do, so that we don't see sort of the local government this instability find its way through here. So regulatory frameworks, I think, are the next step in us sort of developing this idea of having a government which is not dominated by a single party.
Yeah, I mean, I fully concur with that. You do. I mean, we've thought a lot at Good Governance Africa about what kind of commitment devices you can instill through regulatory frameworks that avoid instability, and it's quite difficult. But one of the things you probably do want to see is that the agreements between parties are written up. And are made publicly available, because then you've got something concrete by which citizens can say, no, but you agreed to that. In section 16, it says that. You know? No, you can't just willy-nilly appoint other people to the GNU. No, you're bound by section 16. So that does introduce a level of accountability. The other thing we have thought about is whether you should minimize the opportunity for warring factions to use motions of no confidence. They shouldn't be allowed to be used for nefarious political purposes. But look, I mean, the heart of that question is actually quite a difficult one, because when parties enter into a grand coalition, let's call it that for now, I mean, because if you're a minority party, even if you're, let's say you're the DA, right? You're the major minority party. There's always a risk of being chewed up. Your identity as a party kind of can be subsumed into this broader whole. So you'll see this kind of politicking. The DA minister said this. Well, actually, guys, no, you're a GNU minister now. So it's difficult to know what kind of effect that will have in the next elections. But ideally, and this is hope speaking, citizens reward parties for having governed well. That's certainly our hope.
Can I ask a follow-up question? I think we've could we possibly see an MNC, motion of no confidence, in the GNU? Because when you look at like Joburg, they've had multiple motions of votes of no confidence. Is that a possibility? Should we be mindful of that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's less of a risk at national level than it is anywhere else because of history. The GNU is new, and it was birthed under very different circumstances. Economists talk about path dependence, right? So you imagine a river. It's used to flowing in a particular way, right? When you try and append it, it can be very difficult to swim upstream. But with the GNU, the other benefit of the way it's currently configured is that there's not a massive incentive for any one of those parties or any set of parties within the GNU to collude and disrupt and sabotage. They've all got an interest, got incidents enough to actually make this thing work because they bought in under conditions of knowing that, hey, if this thing fails, we all fail, and if it succeeds, we all succeed. And that's very different to Gauteng, for instance, where it didn't go well.
I'm going to come to you for the second question because it's on education. So the question is, what's the point on investing billions in infrastructure such as schools if there's not enough teachers to teach in these modernized schools? I think recent stats that we released, we had, I forgot how many teachers that have relocated outside of South Africa. So what's the point of investing in infrastructure like schools if we're not going to have these teachers to teach in these schools? And the follow-up question on that is, was cutting budget on education the best interest for the province?
Yeah, so I assume they're specifically referring to what's going on in the Western Cape now with, and also when we come back to that, even Western Cape is a fantastic context because if you look at the specific schools which are losing out, it's not your middle class schools in the southern suburbs, it's your schools which are already disadvantaged, which are getting further by the budget cuts and more teachers are being, like, it doesn't make any logical sense to have a classroom with 60 children and say, actually, you need less teachers so that we can increase your student take to 90 children. Like, it just fundamentally, that's a problem. And this is now the tension that, and I'm so glad they used education as an example because I think one of the beacons of hope in this GNU is the Minister of Basic Education from the DA. I think people have a lot of confidence in the way Siviwe has already approached this and is going to continue approaching this. It's a massive challenge, and education is, if we look at even the past that we come from, education is such a powerful tool because it really is, it either sets you up or doesn't set you up. And if we continue to disinvest in our children and disinvest in our education system, the unemployment stats that we talk about are just going to go up. The crime stats that we talk about are just going to go up. And so I think she has a massive challenge on her hands. This could not have come at a worse time for her as well, because now people are going to be looking to her to explain part of your priorities were to do X, but on the ground, practically what's happening, and the Western Cape is but one example. There are cuts with teachers across the board. And then you've also got this weird issue where we have this massive problem about, well, we've got overcrowded classrooms, and then you've also got a bunch of, so outside of the teachers that are being let go of now, you've also got a lot of teachers who are sitting at home with skills and qualifications. So we talk about the sort of brain drain of teachers that's happening now that are going to work abroad, but before we had this cut now, we had a lot of very skilled, qualified teachers who are sitting at home doing nothing. And then on top of that, you sort of look at the sort of historic issue as well, that there was a decision made by the ANC for God knows what reason to close our technical teaching schools, which also was, we're seeing knock-on consequences of a lot of policy decisions, and this is just but one consequence. But yeah,
sorry, Mr. On that point, though, the problem is not necessarily isolated in education, but the problem is the decision by the ANC to implement an austerity budget, because the budgets are being cut across the board. There are unemployed doctors, unemployed social workers. But we need more social workers. We need more doctors. We certainly need more judges. But we can't get more because they say that there's no budget for that, and that is a decision by the ANC government. So for me, in this GNU and coming up to October and the next year's budget, would be to see how the DA and the ANC navigate that question on the budget, because certainly the Western Cape province, for example, is fighting to say, why are you cutting our budget? But those budget cuts come from National Treasury. So what influence will the DA now have when it's faced with that dilemma? Do they stick with how the ANC has written the budget up to this point, or do they push for more money in certain areas? We might possibly see them say, look, we are fighting for budget cuts in, I don't know, the Department of Public Service, but give more money to education for example.
And on budgets, I think something we don't, as citizens, push hard enough on, especially with Treasury, is how much money goes back to Treasury. And how, just so you have a mandate and you are given a budget to fulfill that mandate, and people sometimes celebrate, oh, this much money came back from this department. That's not good. That's a very, very bad situation. So we focus a lot on budget cuts and all those things, but I don't think we pay enough attention to how much money is just being returned to Treasury, because what does that say about the mandate that you were funded to execute on that you just simply have not done?
Thank you very much. I will only take one question from the audience if there is any. Any question from the audience? Going once, going twice. So to the lady in black.
My question is about, let's say, civil society organizations and a lot of, let's say, private companies who have resorted to doing things themselves because of a lack of confidence in whatever service delivery was supposed to be delivered. How do they now engage with a GNU when they're used to, maybe for however many years, doing things on their own? I think of especially security companies where there's a lot more private security because of a lack of confidence in policing. That's my question.
That's a very good question. And can I jump in there? That is actually a risk to all of us. If more and more people are opting out and they're doing things privately, it's actually a risk to all of us. And we see this more especially in education, where parents who can afford are taking their kids out of the public school system and into the private schooling system. Now, the difficulty is most of our school governance runs on parents being active on the SGB of their school. So and there's tons of research that's been done to show how when parents leave, when middle-class parents, professional parents leave the schools starts going down. They start suffering from a governance perspective. The same is happening with health, where we have two health systems, really, one private, one public. Same with security, where if you don't pay for private security, you're basically unsafe because you don't trust the police. So what should really be happening is more of us should be demanding more from our government on every single issue. We shouldn't be opting out and contracting out things. We are paying taxes, so we shouldn't be paying double taxes now through private fees. So for the sustainability of our society, we need more and more people pushing government to deliver, even on something simple as public transport. You know, when you take the train from town to Rondebosch, you sit next to a poor person, you sit to a person who doesn't look like you. That strikes up a conversation. That creates social cohesion. We're able to be a more stable society through those small interactions. So the more and more people opt out, it actually is not, it's a threat to our long-term viability as a society.
Can I add one point, because I've been mysteriously quiet, actually.
1 minute.
I know, okay.
1 minute remaining.
I just want to say, I actually think, every coin has two sides. I think you know, you're absolutely right. Like, we're so used to the state not serving us that we come up with solutions. We serve ourselves. And we mustn't lose that, but we must equally now get the state to be held to account. I mean, your question about private things being set up on the side, it's been done to fill a deficit, right? And it can bifurcate the system along elitist lines, and that's not a sustainable solution. It's not a fair solution, right? So, for example, I don't believe in private universities. I think they're a quick fix. Like, I believe in maybe what I would love to, and if you want to pray for me, pray for me. Would love to create like a bridging academy between tertiary institutions and practice, whether it's public sector, corporate, whatever, where we upskill and we polish and we get people ready. And that should be available also for people on bursaries that are genuinely committed, that want to invest and stay in this country and fix this country, and that they then get the best quality education in their field. And they stay within a network. And it's by keeping and maintaining that network that we build skills up, that we build capacity, that we inspire. So we need to think differently about how we're doing things. The flip side to the coin about the South African state not having served us and us therefore having had to serve ourselves. I was recently in Copenhagen, and my host there was a professor who's half Iranian and half German. And he said to me, Lauren, when first he was quite depressed when I left because he said, you know, you South Africans have got so much Ubuntu, like it's so nice, you know, you're warm and you open and you talk to people. And there people don't, they're like islands. And it's because the state does everything for them. So he told me a story about someone who collapsed in a supermarket and no one would give the guy CPR. You know, he had to give the guy CPR. But in South Africa, pothole gate, everyone rallies, everyone's helping each other. Like it's that spirit of Ubuntu that, so where populist parties sow seeds of division, we must stand up and say no, because that is the biggest danger, is that we need to be united in goodness, right? And we need to find new ways of doing and being that helps us achieve that, I think. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Another TED Talk for you.
Lauren's TED Talk. There you have it, my fellow South Africans. Thank you very much, ladies and gentle jelly babies. May you please just, with me, just clap hands for our panelists and just say thank you. And as I